What happens when a homeless man approaches Clint Eastwood expecting nothing more than a spare dollar but instead gets an answer that changes everything? A simple request turns into an unforgettable lesson on resilience, second chances, and the power of one small act of kindness. This story will touch your heart in ways you never expected, so stick around until the very end. It was a typical afternoon in Los Angeles, the kind of day when the sun's warmth perfectly balanced out the cool breeze. On Melrose Avenue, a quiet café was a refuge for anyone seeking a break from the hustle of the city. It was at one of the outdoor tables, shaded just enough to block the sun, that Clint Eastwood sat alone, his familiar face mostly hidden behind a pair of dark sunglasses. His presence, however, was unmistakable. Years had passed since Clint's peak, but the aura of the Hollywood icon never dimmed. Even in his quiet moments, people couldn't help but glance over, unsure if they should interrupt his solitude. After all, how often do you get to see a legend like Clint Eastwood just sitting there sipping coffee? Across the street, a much different scene played out. Kevin, a man whose clothes were threadbare and his face weathered, stood by the sidewalk. The cardboard sign in his hand was the last thing he had left to hold on to. One small hope, $1 to feed him for another hour. The desperation in his eyes wasn't something many people noticed. Most just avoided his gaze, but Kevin didn't mind. The world had turned its back on him long ago. He hadn't eaten in 2 days, and the hunger gnawed at him like a constant reminder of how far he had fallen. As he stood there, his eyes shifted nervously across the café, landing on Clint Eastwood. A fleeting thought crossed his mind. What if? What if he could just ask the man for $1? It seemed ridiculous, yet hunger has a way of stripping away pride. Kevin took a deep breath and started walking across the street, the weight of each step growing heavier than the last. As he approached Clint's table, his heart pounded in his chest. His voice, almost drowned by the sounds of the street, was barely audible as he asked, "Sir, can you spare $1?" Clint didn't answer right away. He took his time, slowly removing his sunglasses and looking up at Kevin with an unreadable expression. The seconds dragged on and Kevin's anxiety skyrocketed. Was this a mistake? Was Clint going to dismiss him like everyone else had done before? But then Clint did something Kevin wasn't expecting. Instead of the cold rejection he feared, Clint leaned back in his chair, studying Kevin. $1, huh?" he said, his voice calm, and after a pause he added with a hint of a smile, "Sit down. Let's talk." Kevin froze. Sit down with Clint Eastwood? He couldn't believe what he'd just heard. Kevin hesitated. This moment didn't feel real. Was Clint Eastwood, the legendary actor, seriously inviting him to sit and talk? A man who had been in the presence of some of Hollywood's greatest moments now wanted to hear his story? Kevin scanned Clint's face, searching for any sign that this was some cruel joke, but all he saw was calm curiosity. Taking a deep breath, Kevin lowered himself into the chair opposite Clint. His hands trembled slightly as he placed his cardboard sign on the table, angling it down to avoid too much attention. He felt exposed in a way that was both uncomfortable and oddly comforting. Most people avoided him, pretended he wasn't there, but Clint was looking at him, really looking, as though he wanted to know more than just the surface of his situation. The silence between them was thick, almost like a quiet invitation for Kevin to speak. His usual defensiveness, the walls he'd built up over the years, began to crack. This wasn't just someone tossing him $1 and moving on. Clint Eastwood was actually interested in him. Kevin's voice was raw, hesitant, as he tried to find the words. "I'm sorry if I'm bothering you," he stammered, eyes focused on his hands. I don't like asking for help. I've been trying to find work, but it's been harder than I thought." Clint didn't say anything. He just listened, leaning slightly forward, his expression one of understanding. For Kevin, this was strange. So many people had passed him by, not even giving him a second glance. But Clint wasn't like that. He wasn't offering pity, nor was he brushing Kevin off like a problem to be fixed. He was just there, quietly present. Kevin swallowed hard and pushed himself to continue. "I used to be a contractor," he said, his voice trembling as the words left him. I had a crew, steady work, but then the recession hit. Jobs dried up, the savings ran out, and, well, you can guess the rest. He let out a bitter, hollow laugh. I spent my life building houses for others, and now I can't even keep a roof over my own head. Clint's face didn't change. His eyes softened a bit, but he didn't speak. Kevin felt a new wave of shame rise in his chest, but he was determined not to look away this time. Kevin shifted in his seat, feeling the weight of his own words settle between them. He hadn't said those things out loud in a long time. Maybe never. Most people never asked, never wanted to know how he got here. They saw the ragged clothes, the unshaven face, and made their own assumptions. But Clint had asked, and for some reason, Kevin had answered. I know you probably get asked for things all the time, Kevin added quickly, as if trying to soften the moment. I don't mean to be another guy with a handout, He hesitated, shaking his head. I don't know what else to do anymore. Clint finally leaned back, resting his arms on the chair. His gaze was steady, but something unreadable flickered behind his eyes. He reached for his coffee, took a slow sip, and then placed it down carefully, like he was choosing his next words. You know, Kevin, he said finally, his voice calm, measured. I've played a lot of tough guys in my time, cowboys, soldiers, men who never back down. But the truth is, in real life, everybody gets knocked down. What matters is whether you decide to stay down. Kevin frowned. He wanted to argue, to say that some people didn't have a choice, that not everyone had a way back, but something about Clint's tone made him pause. Clint reached into his pocket, and Kevin braced himself. This was it. The moment where Clint would fish out a couple of dollars, hand them over, and send him on his way, but instead of money, Clint pulled out a small worn business card and slid it across the table. Go here, he said simply. Kevin looked at it, confused. What is this? A shelter, Clint explained. It's run by an old friend of mine. He helps guys like you, gets them cleaned up, finds them work, gives them a shot at something better. But it's up to you to take the first step. Kevin stared at the card, his fingers hovering over it. His throat tightened. He'd been to shelters before, places that promised help but felt more like holding cells, waiting rooms for people society had given up on. Why? Kevin asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Why are you doing this? Clint studied him for a moment, then said something Kevin never expected. Because someone once did it for me. Kevin blinked, caught off guard by Clint's words. Wait, someone helped you? Clint gave a small nod, his expression unreadable. Yeah, he said simply. A long time ago. Kevin couldn't wrap his head around it. Clint Eastwood, the Hollywood legend, the man who played the toughest characters on screen, had needed help once? It didn't seem possible. Clint must have seen the disbelief on Kevin's face because he leaned forward slightly, his voice quieter now. I grew up during the Great Depression. You know what that was like for families who had nothing? My folks did what they could, but times were hard. We moved from place to place, barely scraping by. There were nights I went to bed hungry, wondering if the next day would be any better. Kevin swallowed, not expecting this kind of honesty. I was just a kid when I got my first break, Clint continued. A local mechanic took me under his wing, let me sweep his shop for a few cents a day. It wasn't much, but it gave me something to hold on to, a purpose. Someone believed I was worth something, even when I didn't believe it myself. He paused, his eyes locking onto Kevin's. That's why I'm sitting here now, telling you that this, he tapped the business card on the table, could be the start of something better for you, too. Kevin's fingers traced the edges of the card, his mind warring with itself. He wanted to believe Clint, to trust that this wasn't just another empty promise, but he had been let down before, he had hoped before, and every time life had a way of knocking him lower than he thought possible. I don't know, man, Kevin admitted. Places like this, they don't always help people like me. Clint didn't look away. And what exactly does that mean? People like you? Kevin hesitated. People who've fallen too far. Clint shook his head. There's no such thing. Kevin wanted to argue, to say that Clint didn't understand. But something about the way Clint spoke, the certainty in his voice, made it hard to push back. It was as if he wasn't just offering help. He was challenging Kevin to believe in himself again. For the first time in years, Kevin felt a sliver of something unfamiliar. Hope. Page 5. Kevin exhaled slowly, staring at the business card as if it held the weight of his entire future. His mind spun with 1,000 reasons why this wouldn't work, why trusting someone, anyone, was a mistake. But then he looked at Clint. The man had no reason to sit here and talk to him, no reason to care, and yet he did. Kevin clenched his jaw and let out a small, humorless chuckle. You make it sound so simple. Clint's lips twitched into the faintest smile. It's not, but simple doesn't mean easy. Kevin sighed, running a hand through his unwashed hair. Let's say I go. What if nothing changes? Clint leaned back in his chair, studying him for a long moment before responding. Then that's on you. His voice was steady, but not unkind. Look, Kevin, no one's going to fix your life for you, but if you take the first step, you'll find that people are willing to help. The only question is, are you willing to help yourself? Kevin swallowed hard. The weight of those words settled in his chest, pressing against every excuse, every doubt he had clung to for years. He glanced at the cafe window, catching his reflection in the glass. Tired eyes, unshaven face, a man he barely recognized anymore. For the first time in a long time, he wondered if there was still a way back. A long silence stretched between them before Kevin finally nodded, tucking the card into his pocket. All right, he muttered. I'll think about it. Clint didn't push. He simply nodded as if that was enough. Kevin stood, gripping the edge of the table for a moment before straightening. Thanks, he said awkwardly, his voice rough with emotion. Clint gave him a steady look. Take care of yourself, Kevin. As Kevin turned and walked away, he didn't notice Clint watching him go. A thoughtful expression on his face, one that carried the weight of a man who had once stood at a similar crossroads. Kevin exhaled slowly, staring at the business card as if it held the weight of his entire future. His mind spun with 1,000 reasons why this wouldn't work, why trusting someone, anyone, was a mistake. But then he looked at Clint. The man had no reason to sit here and talk to him, no reason to care, and yet he did. Kevin clenched his jaw and let out a small, humorless chuckle. You make it sound so simple. Clint's lips twitched into the faintest smile. It's not, but simple doesn't mean easy. Kevin sighed, running a hand through his unwashed hair. Let's say I go. What if nothing changes? Clint leaned back in his chair, studying him for a long moment before responding. Then that's on you. His voice was steady but not unkind. Look, Kevin, no one's going to fix your life for you. But if you take the first step, you'll find that people are willing to help. The only question is, are you willing to help yourself? Kevin swallowed hard. The weight of those words settled in his chest, pressing against every excuse, every doubt he had clung to for years. He glanced at the cafe window, catching his reflection in the glass. Tired eyes, unshaven face, a man he barely recognized anymore. For the first time in a long time, he wondered if there was still a way back. A long silence stretched between them before Kevin finally nodded, tucking the card into his pocket. All right, he muttered. I'll think about it. Clint didn't push. He simply nodded as if that was enough. Kevin stood, gripping the edge of the table for a moment before straightening. Thanks, he said awkwardly, his voice rough with emotion. Clint gave him a steady look. Take care of yourself, Kevin. As Kevin turned and walked away, he didn't notice Clint watching him go, a thoughtful expression on his face, one that carried the weight of a man who had once stood at a similar crossroads. Kevin walked aimlessly through the streets of Los Angeles, the business card still clutched tightly in his hand. Every few steps he'd glance down at it, as if expecting the words to change. His mind raced with doubt, fear, and something else, something unfamiliar. Hope. The shelter's address wasn't far, but he hesitated outside its doors for a long moment. He'd been in places like this before, and they had always felt the same. Cold, impersonal, a temporary solution to a permanent problem. But Clint's words echoed in his mind, "No one's gonna fix your life for you, but if you take the first step." Taking a deep breath, Kevin stepped inside. The next few weeks weren't easy. The shelter offered him a clean bed, a few warm meals, and access to resources he had long given up on. They helped him get a temporary job at a warehouse, and though the work was exhausting, there was something deeply satisfying about earning his own money again. One evening, as Kevin sat on the edge of his cot, staring at the ceiling, he made a decision. He grabbed a pen and a scrap of paper and began writing a letter. "Mr. Eastwood, I don't know if you even remember me, but I met you outside that cafe a while back. You gave me a card and told me to take the first step. I wanted to let you know. I did. I got a job. I got a place to stay. I'm still figuring things out. But for the first time in a long time, I feel like maybe I can." Kevin hesitated before writing the last line. "Thank you. For seeing me when no one else did." He never expected a response. But writing it was enough. Months passed. Kevin saved up, found a small apartment, and even started volunteering at the same shelter that had helped him. He saw himself in the people who walked through its doors, tired, hopeless, afraid to believe in second chances. And every time he'd tell them what Clint had told him. "Your story isn't over yet. You get to decide the next chapter. A small act of kindness can change a life forever." If this story inspired you, like, share, and subscribe to spread more hope and second chances. Thanks for watching, and until next time.